We're sitting in Malacanang Palace. It'll be about 3 weeks before the end of the administration of Philippine President Benigno Aquino. This is not his first time in the palace, however. You know, he came in and lived in Arlegui when his mother, Corazon Aquino, overthrew then President Ferdinand Marcos in the celebrated 1986 People Power Revolt. Well, the irony, of course, is that in the last elections, just about a month ago, you had Senator Bongbong Marcos come in within about 200,000 votes of getting the vice presidency. Sitting with us today to talk about this times of, well, interesting times, but these very, I think, a time of political change, interesting times for the Philippines, is Philippine President Benigno Aquino. Mr. President, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So let me ask you about that. Were you surprised by how well Senator Marcos did?
When we became the front runner in the surveys, yes. No? That to me seemed to be such an impossibility. But then again, when you look at it, hopefully in an objective manner, you find out that how many of those opposed to him were fragmented, number one. Number two, perhaps we should have paid more attention to their long-running campaign, yes. The revisionist view of history that they had tried to portray. Perhaps we should have paid more attention to those 30 years after EDSA. No? There is a new generation that never experienced what martial law was.
Right.
And sometimes even the difficulty of, for instance, the concept of suppression of information. No, in these days of smartphones and tablets and laptops and everything else, where you have instant access to everything, perhaps it's so difficult for them to understand how easy it is to cut any sources of information.
Yes.
Even the technology that was used then and the technology used now, really miles and miles apart.
Yes, yes.
So we should have done a better job of explaining how power used incorrectly can really be thoroughly abused to the detriment of our people.
These elections were a surprise for so many people. I mean, analysts have said it's the first social media elections. Mm-hmm. I mean, what surprised you aside from Senator Marcos doing so well?
Social media. Perhaps that's a new. You know, when the first time I ran, we'd go on a house-to-house campaign, because the people you'll get to see in the house-to-house are not the people who normally tend to go to rallies. Then you have another group of people who are in the rallies. Then there are people who are working you cannot catch at home and you cannot catch in the rally. Therefore, you have to go through media. Social media is another way of getting to your constituencies.
Yes.
And like any other tool, can be used for good or for bad.
Again, to talk about social media, because the two candidates who used social media extremely well were Senator Marcos and Rodrigo Duterte. What was the biggest lesson you learned in the loss of Marlborough in these elections?
We're still trying to discern all of the lessons to it. No? Perhaps in a sense, not to take away anything from the success of the campaigns that actually won, they were able to really differentiate themselves from, I guess, the pack. No? But on the other hand, I think we can say that we campaigned. I had to run the country whilst campaigning also.
Yes.
From number 4 in the survey to number 2 is, I think, nothing to be ashamed about. No? Perhaps there should have been a better effort somewhere earlier, and might have resulted in a difference. Let me just give you a specific example. In the province, there is no place in the country that I am afraid to go to because we neglected them. Mm-hmm. We can point to multiples, for instance, in terms of infrastructure budgets that have been given to every place in the country. We can talk about multiples of the Pantawid Pamilya families,
yes.
No? Yes. And so many other achievements. No? And but the thing is, how do you translate it to every individual to say, look, we created all of this together. Look, this is the stepping stone towards the next level.
Right.
We had to, everything that has been done had the hindrances and the baggage that of the actions or lack of actions of those that came before us, we had to contend with. We've eliminated a lot of these problems, and we've planted the right seeds. And It's for you to nurture so that
Right.
we will have the real growth or the complete growth that we're all aspiring for. Now, to be able to do that, um, there was another interviewer, I guess that's the best way to put it. She said, you had the courage to invest long-term in education, something that doesn't produce results in the next quarter.
Yes.
No? And they asked, why did you do that?
Yes.
And I said, and another way of asking that question is, I promise kung walang corruption, kung walang there's no corruption, there will be no poor people. Kung walang corrupt, walang mahirap. Bakit raw may mahirap pa ngayon? So I had to ask the people who asked me that, it's becoming a stock question. You know,
I won't ask that.
Nobody said, how do you become rich? If yesterday you were poor, how do you become rich today?
Yeah.
Unless you steal. No? So you actually have to capacity. You know, the other portion of that is it has to trickle down. That's why we abandoned trickle down. The whole idea is capacitate them so that they can join the economic growth at the earliest possible time. And you can see that in the 9 million course graduates of TESDA.
Right.
You can see that in the elimination of the backlog, for instance, in classrooms, the hiring of so many teachers, something to the tune of about 145,000. You know, can I just highlight that 185,000 classrooms finished by, I think, the first quarter of next year, to include areas where land is scarce, no? That you have to have multi-story buildings already, which increases the cost dramatically. From a budget that usually and traditionally can support something like 8,000 classrooms per year. By the 6 years, it's 48,000. We will build 185,000. So you take care of the K-12 needs. You take care of the 30 and 40-year-old, obsolete structures, and you rebuild all of those that were devastated by typhoons or being moved to better locations, less risky. So, again, how do you say we're on the right track when you cannot demonstrate results for those who look at it on a very short-term basis?
Right. So you're saying you were building for the long haul. I mean,
Yes.
you're
You know, we didn't. You know, did our growth come from exploiting on a pure basis just the natural resources, being a commodities exporter? And look what has happened on those countries that are primarily commodity export-driven economies and
Right.
where they are now.
right. Well, so let me ask you before we go into the nuts and bolts of what you actually accomplished. Very few people join the ranks of world leaders. I mean, how did having the presidency for 6 years, how did that change you as a man? How did it shape you as a leader?
Well, thank you for asking that question. My mother used to say that the one thing I lacked was my willingness to travel, by being exposed to a lot of different cultures, I guess. No? And she felt that that was such a necessary skill. Just to, I guess, to live in this new age where the world is getting smaller and smaller. But somehow I felt I was most content being in the Philippines. Okay? So here I am. I have to suddenly deal with a lot of world leaders. I have to understand where they're coming from, and in an effort to find the common ground so we can move forward. I'm told, for instance, shall we say, a lot of times in the early part, I felt like they were talking to me because they had to talk to me as opposed to they wanted to talk to me. And in one, I won't name the leader, no? But the thing was, I think the first time I met him, he's from the other hemisphere. The first time I met him, he was kind of, I think he was delivering a soft key sermon. And transformation, say 4 years, 5 years later, he is earnestly asking us to visit his country on a state visit. Now, initially, there were problems attributed to my predecessor in terms of the credibility of the Philippines, especially in ASEAN. To now, where we have ASEAN listening to us and trusting us that we will stand by our words on the issues that affect us commonly. And so, I think I've grown as a person. I hope I presented the best face of the Philippines and made the case that our causes are legitimate and we are a worthwhile partner, and we really are sincere when we say that when we look at growth, we want growth not on a one-sided basis but on a multidimensional basis for all parties concerned.
Aside from the numbers, though, how were you changed by the presidency?
You know, when I used to hear people say it's such an honor to serve the people, now that I had to face so many challenges, and all along the route, no, perhaps not in particular snapshots, but at the end, I could always count on our people to fully support whatever I had to do. Really made me feel in a very, very palpable manner what it means. When you say that phrase, it really is an honor to serve. Really, there seemed to be no challenge that couldn't be surmounted given that trust and that support from our countrymen.
For a long time, you did have the majority, that you were one of the most popular presidents.
One of the April surveys still said.
Still says you.
I had something like 10 percentage points more than when I got, well, I'm comparing, I got 42% of the vote, roughly. No? And I had an approval rating of 52%. So I'd like to say I even gained at the end of the term from the numbers that were most optimistic.
So if you were to give yourself a grade?
I wouldn't do that. Goes against my cultural beliefs of Tagalog, nagtata sa sarili bangko.
How did you do as president? What were the highs? What were the lows?
The highs and the lows. Well, the highs, of course, a lot in the economic sphere.
Yes.
When we talk about, for instance, even dealing with natural disasters like typhoons, we get visited by 20 a year.
Yeah.
From a point of, one of the very first typhoons under my watch, Pag-asa misdirected us. They told us it was going to go to Aurora and actually went to southern Tagalog.
Yeah, yeah.
No? To now, when a Pag-asa that has credibility, I really like that phrase, sa Pag-asa may pag-asa na ngayon. but really, no, when we started out typhoons, normally it will just be the wind. Now, Pag-asa is able to tell us the strength of the wind, the amount of rainfall, the actual track of the typhoon, the intensity in these particular areas that will be hit. Then you're confident that the DSWD is ready, that the Office of Civil Defense and the NDRRMC are functional, that they actually talk to each other, and that there's coordination. That's one of the highs. PhilHealth, no? From anywhere 47 to 51% dependent on whether it was enrollees, no? Dependent on whether or not it was an election year, to PhilHealth claims 93 million members at this point in time. The 4.6 million households that are being assisted, no? That I was explaining it to my writers and my researchers. If your only capacity is to do menial work, no? Then chances are you will not be just on your own. You will not be able to improve the lot of your children, and they will in turn become subject again to menial work only, or that's the only possibility. Now you have an increasing workforce that has no skills, going after the limited jobs brings about more and more deterioration as the generations go. They actually have a term for that, intergenerational poverty.
Yes.
And I think we are in this. We are breaking that vicious cycle and turning it into a virtuous cycle. I keep pointing out, for instance, in TESDA, when they train somebody to participate in the BPO, the cost to train is recouped by government in the first tax that is paid by this worker that was given that opportunity. So even on a yearly thing, you have the wherewithal to continue the program and afford more and more people that opportunity. Of course, Joel Villanueva keeps on teasing me that a lot of their graduates make multiples of my salary within 6 months after graduation.
Joel Villanueva did very well in the Senate. The surprise there. So you've stated this. You've been looking at the fundamentals and you're working at the fundamentals. But where could you have done better?
The communication aspect of it. For instance, when Joel was wanted to run in 2013, I said, shouldn't we build, your survey numbers are like this? Don't you think you'd better have a base? Think about TESDA and your ability to be able to really affect change, a powerful change in the people. Then he was a bit disappointed, but then he agreed.
Yes.
And he devoted so much energy into it. No? And again, 9 million course graduates.
He did very well, and we saw it in the elections.
So, And how many actually realized it, perhaps in the campaign period itself.
Yes.
When you talk about, you know, let me give you a for instance. No? There's a figure. Let me try and look for it. Highways. We inherited in the budget an item for, it's a 600 million project. This is the underpass at Arneta and Quezon Avenue. And there was a recalculation by DPWH as to how much it should cost. But the significant thing was, it was actually brought down to something like 2/3 of the price. From 600, it became a little less than 400 million, if I'm not mistaken. And that continues, no? There's a major bridge that connects, Herona is a town in Tarlac. It's divided right in the middle by a river, and it's the rainy season. The western portion gets isolated. They have to go through Ignacia and then Tarlac City to get to the Poblacion. So that was brought in again below budget and in time. So
You took early hits on DPWH, right? In 2011, you went through all of the processes. Sorry, go ahead.
694.15 million was the budget that was initially allocated for the Quezon Avenue project. They brought it in at 430 million.
Fantastic. So DPWH is a perfect example. In 2011, some of the low GDP was actually attributed to the lack of spending, and that was the time we spoke then, and you said that you were cleaning up the process to make sure that it was corruption free, and now you have this, and yet it's being turned over to somebody who many people feel may have a conflict of interest, Mark Villar. How do you feel about this? I mean, what do you see?
Can I leave those questions to the Commission on Appointments, which is their function?
Okay, fair. So let me ask you, going back then to the other things. I mean, any other things you felt that you could have done a better job at? Things that you would do differently?
Well, discoveries throughout the years. For instance, the local water districts that provide a lot of water, especially beyond the areas where we have concessionaires. Quite a number are non-operational. But in general, they have very little financial capabilities. So that the sourcing of the water is primarily the aquifers, which brings about the problem of the soil sinks. There's a technical term.
The soil sinks. Groundwater.
Subsidence.
Yeah,
soil subsidence. Intrusion of salt water.
Sure.
Okay. So the idea is, if we pull several of them together and pull their resources together, then they can probably have the wherewithal with government assistance of establishing their own reservoirs and use surface water, which we're visited by 20 typhoons a year. We can utilize the rates that they bring in, and we protect our land. No? And so, unfortunately, that was perhaps in the third year or the fourth year. Because you had to deal first with the flooding, with the rape of the watersheds, with the reform of MWSS, so many different things. So normally, when you get to solve a problem, you will gain knowledge that tells you, oh, there's another segment to this.
Right. Everything is interlinked.
Yeah. Well, we try to address all of the links. But at some point, there are discoveries that happen in the course of governance and say, why should we do that? And sometimes it changes. For instance, the population, we started out with something like 2.08 population growth rate, and said it has to be reduced. So I think we're now at 1.8 or 1.87, somewhere thereabouts. No? And after achieving that, now they say that to replenish our population, we have to maintain a 2% population growth rate. And thank you for changing the goalposts. Well, that's one. Of course, we're hoping that there's an acceleration in the judicial system in the country also.
So let me ask you about that. One of the first risks you took, and you bet it was an all or nothing risk to try to impeach the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Yes. When you did that, after it happened, you then did another risky move, which was you appointed the youngest justice and a woman, the first Supreme Court. I mean, this will reverberate for the next 2 decades. Why did you do it, and how is it coming along?
I think really very well no, with the appointment of the Chief Justice. What is the main
This is
reason?
Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno.
The main reason being that give her or whoever it was that was going to steer the Supreme Court enough time to be able to effect the changes, the reforms that have always been wished for, but have never been done. No? For instance, and I'm still looking for all of the specifics that we delivered in the judicial reform. But one of the things that I remember was we have a very low conviction rate.
Yes.
No, 13%.
Yeah.
You contrast that with Japan, which is approaching 100%. I think in America it's about, and I'm still looking for the notes, but something like 60 to 80%. So the fiscal studies, the prosecutor studies the case, decides to bring the case to court, and loses 87% of the time.
Yeah.
So how do you stop criminality when there's no certainty of punishment? No. So I'll give you another.
Interesting.
I'll give you other nuts and bolts issues there. What has this Chief Justice done? No? For instance, we brought to our attention that I believe it's under the Build, Operate, Transfer law,
Yes.
wherein government infrastructure cannot be stopped by a TRO. What is required is government posts a bond for the value of the land that is in exercise of eminent domain, I believe. Lawyers might criticize my logic, but it's something to that effect, so that we can continue the project and there is just compensation.
Right.
Okay. So what is the go around there? There was a DPWH, amongst others, was telling me that the new TRO is a determination of just valuation. So in effect, the infrastructure is put on hold, and Skyway Stage 3 has been delayed because of that, and various others. I think that even the NAIA Expressway has also been delayed because of the issue of valuation.
Yes.
So we brought attention to, and the whole spirit of the law is government infrastructure is needed by society. It shouldn't be delayed. And we brought it to the attention of the Chief Justice. And there was a reminder to the lower courts that government projects shouldn't be delayed by that particular issue. That's one. Another instance in my memory right now is there were times when there was an RTC judge, kind of famous in our circles, who was ordering a co-equal branch, a co-equal court, an RTC. And RTCs do not order RTCs.
Yes.
No? It's a Court of Appeals, it's a Supreme Court that can order everybody around. So that was also brought to their attention. He said, yes, we are looking into this, and we also have him in our records already. We're also trying to help them. We supported them in their move towards the Bonifacio Global City.
Yes.
One of the things that it now sounds amusing, but it was really kind of pathetic, was the Supreme Court actually sits on land belonging to the University of the Philippines. And you have these walkways.
Yeah,
no?
yeah.
I said, what are these walkways for? There's to connect the UP Manila campus to each other, because there's this building that doesn't actually belong there. So you had, at one time when Edna Chura was one of the most junior members of the Supreme Court, he actually had an office apart from the main building. I remember, right, near the kitchen or something. How do we expect dignity in the workplace if they are not afforded a dignified workplace? So there's a multi-billion Supreme Court, a new complex for the Supreme Court to be able to help them render justice better, faster, more efficiently, more correctly. Sorry. So again, she'll be there for a long time. That wasn't really a primary consideration, but that was seen as a benefit. That here is somebody who will have quite a big opportunity to really, I don't know if reset is the correct word to say it, the dispensation of justice, but really to be able to dramatically and drastically reform.
And in your calculation, it was worth the disruption with the senior justices, for example, and
yes.
yes.
No. But there were so many other factors that
Yes.
were being weighed. No? I tried to hear all voices. No? Those who in favor of who, opposed to who, why are you in favor, why are you opposed. And at the end of the day, we felt that the best candidate at that point in time to become the Chief Justice was Chief Justice Sereno.
CCT is another thing that your administration pushed forward as new. The conditional cash transfer, which was in some ways fashioned after Brazil, but you made it your own, I guess. How would you gauge the way it performed? Did it do what you wanted it to do?
One of the things that really was pleasant was there was a study on the effects of CCT that says at least 7.7 million have been lifted out of the poverty line. Then,
So this is like pump priming the bottom. I mean, giving people who are poor the money they need.
If the idea is to capacitate,
Yes.
and they are excluded from education, how do you actually capacitate? There is another number that is very interesting. In 2008, and I understand the study is done every 5 years, there was something like 2.8 million out-of-school children. You must remember during my mom's time was when they made basic education, elementary and high school
Yes.
free. But so many, the phenomenon of OSY came about, and people were so poor that they couldn't even afford transportation or the
Yes.
baon.
Yes, yes.
And so the number in 2008, again, was 2.8. The number in 2013 had been reduced to 1.2 despite the growing population. So that, I think, is also further proof that the 85% attendance condition of the CCT is being met by most of the 4.6 million households that are being assisted. Then we expanded in 2014 to high school. We graduated about 330,000 the first batch, of which about 13,400 are honor students who, if without this program, would have probably been out of school youth or reduced again to menial labor. Now, the two that, you got to be inspired. The two that spoke for all of them got accepted into the UP College of Engineering, which is a quota course.
Fantastic.
And I had the chance to talk to the woman who represented them, and I said, engineering, you'll be out in the field when you have all of these products of whitening and all of that. Why are you interested in engineering? Then she replies matter-of-factly, so it's about math. If it's all math, it's the easiest thing in the world, isn't it?
It's clear.
That's for you. It's easy for us. It's not exactly that easy. But again, that optimism she exuded lifted me up for quite a while.
Fantastic. I'm going to pick up a question from Twitter for you because it follows what we're talking about from 2019 Poll Watch. Wow, galing ito Are there critical reforms that you failed to implement which you would endorse to the incoming president?
To endorse, my mother had this famous line about not seeking unsolicited advice. So I'd rather follow that.
Has he asked for your advice at all yet?
If I asked, I will give it to him all the benefits of our hard-won lessons. If not, I would not prefer unsolicited advice.
Wow, statesman type. Let me ask you, so always in any institution, whether it's a small company or the country, right, it is always the strengths and the weaknesses of the leader that determines the strengths and the success and failure of that. In your case, the strength seems to be here, what we've seen in the last 6 years, the fundamentals. You stick to the figures, you're looking at the numbers, you're looking at making sure that the schoolrooms, the hospitals, that all of these things reach capacity, right? That they're actually built. Your weaknesses, I mean, we've seen them documented through the years, is your loyalty to your friends. In some instances, and most recently, Mama Sapano would be the one. I guess, how would you look back at that? In the case of Mama Sapano, is this...
So in Mama Sapano, the fundamental issue, number one, the Peñas is somebody I met on the job.
Okay.
Right? Number two, he actually performed in the anti-illegal logging operations in the Caraga region. Number three, amongst his, I think this was something I learned afterwards, was he was head of the regional mobile group. That's not a phrase that they use. But he was a regional of, in that particular area, I guess what I'm trying to say is he was familiar with the terrain.
With it, right.
Now,
but this one was also about Purisima and your relationship with him,
well,
right?
Purisima was, as Chief PNP, was informing me about all of these law enforcement operations even before he got suspended.
Okay.
One. Second, he has been trained when he was still in the PSG by, shall we say, one of the elite forces in the world.
Yes.
Active elite forces on a government-to-government basis. Now, he taught me a lot of the things when it comes to special operations. So, as a subject matter expert, no, and somebody I trusted, and somebody whose language I could understand, I guess, no, who also knows me personally. So, you can talk in shorthand, I guess, and see it done now. So on. But at the end of the day, I have to center on Peñas. No? We agreed on the analysis of the operation, the difficulty, the concept of Pintakasi or the possibility of Pintakasi, the concept that 160 individuals presents precisely that condition for Pintakasi.
Right.
The need to have a coordination with the AFP. In fact, I made it specific. No, you cannot talk to them when you move out towards the objective. You have to talk to them, coordinate, because it's already been coordinated on the highest level. Now, for the ground commander, you have to talk to them that they have what you need available on the day that you needed it. Now, some of the things that have come about, studying it afterwards, were they presented to me a very thick, what I thought was the operational plan. Now, the professionals tell me this is a concept of operations.
Okay.
I'll ask them to bring me yung JC Pakigwa, Exodus. It's so thorough. It talks about weather conditions, percent of illumination of the moon, moonrise and moonset, tide. Talks about who the possible opposition is, where are they located, how many men, how many arms.
Okay.
They talk about friendly forces. They even have a coordination table, because that was the main issue.
Right.
You have to coordinate.
Right.
So I was presented with names, with offices, offices. This is the coordination table. No? Of course, I didn't understand TOT, because TOT to me is coordination. No, coordination of artillery and bombing strikes.
Okay.
No, it seems that there's a specific meaning for the SAF when they use TOT, and of course it says TOT, not time on target. Now, anyway, there's a major. This one, at that point in time, was no longer. When this was being presented to me, he had been relieved from this position, assigned elsewhere 6 months before.
Yes.
The disposition of the armed forces units also was at least 6 months out of date. But when he presented to me, because I keep asking him a question, he'll present a particular slide. Fortunately, I managed to secure a copy afterwards. So the point is, did we have legitimate targets?
Right.
Yes. Is it risky? Yes. Could the risk be manageable? Yes. Did he follow orders? No.
Yes.
Because again, I have to emphasize, you have to coordinate sufficient number of time, meaning days, so that the people, the equipment, everything is in place. One of the, for instances, assuming they went surreptitiously in just that small group, our Green Berets, our special forces, operate airboats.
Yes.
And the majority of these airboats are in this area of Mindanao.
Right.
And they are tasked with extraction from hot zones.
Right.
But of course, they have to be told, we need you, or we might need you should be ready. So, for the life of me, here is a 2-star police general who graduated from the PMA, which has a motto of courage, integrity, and loyalty, who said yes, sir, twice to the idea of coordination, which was an order from me, and it was a legitimate order based on logic. And he agreed with all of it. But in the execution, he decided to go on his own route. Then starts blaming everybody else except him. So, did I, I'd like to say, and I think that I was asked at some point in time, friendship stops when the country's interests are at stake. I'll be very specific. Junabaya is heading the DOTC.
Yeah.
There are a lot of issues in the DOTC. Would it be better to find somebody else? One of the foremost things in my mind was when you talk about, or used to talk about corruption, they'll say DPWH, they'll talk about customs. Not too many people seem to realize that because of all of the jargon, the technology involved in DOTC,
that
it's the easiest. If I can, in ZTE.
Yeah.
How many still remember that ZTE, where we were going to get all of those equipment, actually was buying equipment from Israel? It was not their equipment.
Yes.
So, logically, to set up that network, we could have probably gone to the primary source and gotten a better price.
Right.
But we were at a very late stage in that contracting with ZTE.
Yes.
So, the
So
point
you're saying you trusted at least what I'm getting, you trusted Junabaya.
Number
To
one,
not be
not to be corrupt,
Yeah,
which is the fundamental.
yeah.
Number two, had training, no, in very related fields.
Okay.
Number three was the he was chair of APRO in the House. Now, and then back to the communicating. Could it have been done better? You know, anything made by an imperfect being like man, by definition, is imperfect and can be improved. No? Was he? I'm sure. No. In hindsight, everybody will say that this, done that. But everybody who keeps saying an opinion, hopefully you'll also go back to what are the conditions emanating.
Right, right.
You know, one of the things that I really distinctly remember is, why are the trains bogging down? And he tells me, number one, sir, there was an overhaul that was scheduled in, I think, 2008 to ensure that it reaches the 15-year lifespan.
Yes.
And what happened? They did something. So they did an overhaul. They did something, a minor overhaul, a major. Yes. Wala, you know, one time, just to give you what he has to contend with. No? And again, with all due respect, I'm not blaming anybody at this point. I mean, the people who are actually there. If you remember, there was a PNR train that fell on its side near
Yes.
Villamor.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Amongst the things they discovered was, you know, when you join rails, there is I think they call it a fish angle bar. The bar connects the two pieces of rail. There are 4 nuts and bolts. Well, technically there are 2 with bolts and 2 that are press fitted. So they showed us pictures. Some of them had 4, some of them had 3, some of them had 2, some of them had 1. Now instead of 1, at least 2, no? 1 on that rail and 1 on this rail, you only had 1. So I asked, the person who was talking to me was the deputy general manager, who happened to be an accountant by trade. Sabi ko, I want to talk to your engineers. So we waited for the engineers. So I asked them, when you have 3 only of the 4, is that still considered safe? No answer. If you have 2, no, is that still not safe? If it's 1, obviously, I guess it's no longer safe. What are the limitations when there are, you know, bolts that are missing? Lower speeds, etc.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I guess I had quite a number of questions, and I stopped asking questions rather, when I was not getting any answers. And these were the most senior people there, no? And I called Jun's attention to it. And the general manager was out of the country. I want the general manager back here as soon as possible. I want him to start addressing all of this. I want a report on what he actually did. No? And he doesn't leave, doesn't do anything else until this is settled. Then his main issue was, sir, under the procurement law, it takes us this long to get that.
Yes, yes.
And in a sense, that's also true. No? Anything government wants takes about 4 to 6 months. No? From the time you order to the time it gets delivered.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I replace him with somebody that's less trustworthy, and who will accept the position at a year to go. We do it and things like that. And
But you looked at your own weaknesses and you tried to mitigate them, would you say?
I think so, in a lot of instances.
Yes.
But, yeah.
No, go ahead, sir.
You know, because I remember so many people that, you know, our relationship has changed. No?
Yes.
Or some that didn't change. Si Rico Pudo, for instance.
Yes,
No?
yes.
But he wasn't performing to the level that I felt he should be doing.
Yes.
You know? And certain, shall we say, attitudinal issues. One. Somebody, unfortunately, I had to let go, was Virgie Torres of LTO, who was since passed on.
Yes, yes.
But, you know, back of my mind, a lot of the issues that are now hounding the LTO, for instance, weren't issues during her watch.
Yes, yes. Well, let me throw back. I mean, we talked about Mama Sapano a little bit, but its impact on the BBL, which was one of your flagship, was huge.
Yes.
I mean, could you have done anything more? Did you consider the BBL when you decided to move forward with Mama Sapano?
There is it's other connected. When I ordered Na Peña specifically to coordinate with this counterpart, which in this case later on was the 6th Infantry Division that had operational control. The AFP, I am sure, was very, very familiar and had already practiced all of these agreements with the MILF to precisely prevent an occurrence of a misencounter.
Yes.
So even if the PNP was not aware of all of these, the AFP to whom they are coordinating will remind them. We have to give them notice. We have to give
You
them
were
time
certain
to
with
step
checks
aside.
and balances that
Yeah.
it would have been if coordination had happened.
And I have to go back to, I never assumed for an instant that Na Peñas, as a two-star general, who I'm sure I promoted at least to the two-star rank, and probably to the first star, would ever say yes to the chief executive while precisely thinking that I will not follow this order. I never thought that I would meet a senior officer who felt that a lawful, logical order is optional.
Okay. Okay, lots of questions are coming in on Facebook and on Twitter and on Rappler. Thank you for the questions. We'll try to get to them, but let me bring you back on, this is from Facebook, Howard Tunky. Mr. President, in hindsight, do you think you could have done more to expedite or reinforce Mar Rojas' candidacy? Let me put this in the context of something you said earlier, which is that perhaps you should have done something differently when we were talking about lessons learned from Mar Rojas' loss, I guess.
Well, number one, yung Mar Rojas had to work until about a year prior to the campaign. And I think less than a year yata before the campaign. And I prevailed upon him na, look, finish your function. Now, everybody else, some people say that they aspire to the presidency from birth.
Yes,
No?
yes.
So somebody who had that as the ultimate objective. And I'd like to think that most of the people around us had fulfilled that responsibility of addressing our people's needs now. And then personal ambitions were in a sense secondary.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so that's a part of it. Now, again, the old-fashioned phrase is teaching. Why are we doing this? So parang part is actually doing the governance part.
Yes.
Perhaps we could have done a little bit better with saying, these are the hindrances to it. These this is what we want to achieve. These are the obstacles that have to be met. These are the resources that we have. These are the things that can be expected this time. In a sense, I really wonder whether that should be our function, 50% explaining everything and 50% doing. Now, what you take time in terms of the explaining portion is lost in the doing portion. So would we have served our people better by attending to propaganda more than doing the governance?
Interesting.
And
your lesson, would you? Would you do it differently?
No.
No. You would still?
No.
Okay.
If I had the choice,
Yeah.
One or the other,
Yes.
I'd have to choose in doing
To do. Yeah.
that which is needed by our people.
Mr. President, to follow up that same question, though, you did a last-ditch effort to try to unite Mar Rojas and Grace Poe.
Not last ditch, from the beginning.
Oh, you were. So,
We had that meeting that lasted until 2:30 in the morning. Tried to get everybody together.
yes.
Was not successful. Towards then, I was prevailed upon to try again
Yes.
by quarters who are not affiliated to any of our political parties. I tried again. There was another one, there were two actually na religious who prevailed upon me to try and get them together. The one was really, parang, please lang, sige na, subukan mo na, baka sakali. This was like the last week of the campaign. And I replied na, I don't think anybody is predisposed to giving way.
Yes.
Please try. I tried. I might have looked ridiculous. I might have looked naive. Pero let's see, baka naman these persons are being used by God to deliver a message. I tried. Obviously, it failed.
Yes.
At least we maintained communication.
Yes. Did Duterte win? What does that show about the Filipino public today, the Filipino voters?
Well, again, the differentiation.
Yes.
I am different. Okay. Again, very, very masterful way of the campaign. Am I running? Am I not running? Okay. And all the attendant. So we really have to hand it to him, to them. They really mounted that better campaign. That was the right tone, the right messaging, at the right time.
There's also great anger we see it on social media and we see it all the time now. What do you make of this anger?
Can I ask, how confident are you that what you see on social media is representative, as opposed to the concept of trolls that everybody keeps talking about these days?
So what we've seen is a pretty organized campaign, but they seem to be real people. And organized, very organized in messaging, organized in approach, but the anger of the real people who they've mobilized is there.
Some quarters would disagree.
Would disagree. Well, I guess if you think about it, it also mirrors the anger in the United States. My own theory about this is that technology, that social media has allowed everybody a voice, and that the 99% who don't have or who don't feel like they benefit in the...
What about everybody who's been complaining that they say, I keep getting all of these stories, they say something positive about me, there's so many that pounce on them right away. Instantly.
Yes. Yes.
So organized volunteer would not have that much number of people.
But I would also, we've also seen from social media, we've seen it in the surveys, the statistical surveys, and we saw it in the vote, right? So if that's the case, I think part of what seems to be driving it is anger. I mean, so what do you do with that? How do you look at it, and how would you ask Filipinos to deal with this today, so that the fissures don't open up?
Well, number one, perhaps it has to be all who purport to be leaders, regardless of whatever sector, should ensure that those fissures don't really
don't
open
erupt. Yeah.
Perhaps that we should remember that if we want to get to an agreement on anything, there has to be a responsible dialogue and a civil dialogue. And we have tried to encourage the whole spectrum of opinions, regardless of where they come from. I think the record will bear us out that we keep on reaching out to even our most vociferous critics. Now, whether or not it was successful, at the very least, we really attempted, and not just attempted, we attempted several times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as the anger is concerned,
yes.
For instance, let's talk about traffic. And
yes.
How big a phenomenon is that here? And of course, everybody, especially in the campaign period, had their 2 cents in.
Yes.
I actually asked our comms people to put it in a digest for small, to explain what is it all about. And there's so many excuses, but I'm not fond of excuses. No? But that is the reality.
Mm-hmm.
We have, DTI says something like mid-20s or upper 20s year-on-year growth for vehicles. In 2 years' time, and they were referring to, it's either 2013, 14, or 14 and 15. They gave me figures of about 600,000, actually about 630,000 new vehicles, cars, plus 1.2 million motorcycles for each of those years.
Oh, wow.
Now, when you go to a mall, look at the area reserved just for motorcycles, and imagine all of that on the streets. Now, if you look at pictures, I guess, of what motorcycles look like in Hanoi at the rush hour.
Yes, yes.
But perhaps even the better example is Thailand when it was growing, and you had Taipans who were riding in pickups, which had the motorcycle on the flatbed, so that they can continue to move. Perhaps, are we as worse? Are we a little better off in the same level of growth? We want, and that's part of the problem. The other part is, when you fly around the NCR, look for any empty space. And whenever there's infrastructure that you need, you have to put it somewhere.
Yes.
And how many are willing to have, Guadalupe Bridge, for instance, has been identified as not being compliant with the current building code, which has ability to withstand 7.2 earthquake on the Richter scale. So there has to be a retrofitting of it, but you cannot close it down. No?
Yes.
It's being overutilized at this point in time. Therefore, there is a new bridge that has to be built there. So I think it extends from the University of Makati on one bank to, we realigned it to all of these warehouses and factories that are no longer being used, so that there is minimal disruption to all of the residences. Then you have an oppositor.
Yes.
And, okay, not there. Let's put it up. Somebody will oppose there. And then, why are you not putting it all up? And nobody wants it. No? Nobody wants it in their place, but everybody wants it to happen.
The complexity of
So I go back, no?
Yeah.
I did ask all the agencies concerned to have a dialogue again
Yeah.
with the concerned residents. And
Yeah.
let's try to, at least one more attempt at trying to get 100% consensus, which is probably an impossibility, but at least let's try. So it's not that easy. No?
Yes, yeah.
And,
Well, our GDP this quarter is higher than China's, right? It's better than China's.
They might get mad at me again if I open my mouth. But
Well, we don't have
we're-
time to touch on China.
we're hoping the second quarter will be as good, if not
As
better.
good, if not better. So what you're saying is that it brings the higher GDPs also brings its own problems, but shouldn't they have been anticipated, like in traffic?
If you will go back to my speech in the inauguration of the Skyway Stage 3 project,
Yeah.
no, I did mention that as I'm delivering this speech, I'm sure my critics are already talking about the traffic, the dust, the noise. And obviously I cannot go to, what are the hardware stores? Ace Hardware store and say, give me this elevated
Yes.
road network to be installed overnight. After that speech, there was very muted criticism.
Yes.
No? And now, siguro one of the presidential candidates was saying, there should have been foresight, there should have been less of this infra. No? And, yung Skyway Stage 3 and the other one by a company called, I think it's MPIC, no? Are both variations of the Metro Manila Expressway promised by Mr. Marcos in the mid to late 70s.
Okay. Okay. So that's how far behind we are. Yeah.
And parang, if it's not there, people complain. When you're trying to put it in, people complain. Then I guess, I just remember during my mom's time when they had all of those flyovers built.
Yeah.
No? I can still recall what they did to Ping De Jesus,
Yes,
how
yes.
much pilloried he was. And at the end of the day, when it was finished and no stoplight from, EDSA then was kind of, wow, no stoplight from Makati to Quezon City. Yeah. Did anybody praise Ping De Jesus? I'm hard pressed to find a single source of praise for this missionary work. And he was, at that point in time, no talk, no mistake, which led to no action. Then he came and he said, no, I will have action. And he got sued by all of the losing contractors. And only time he ever got to finish all of that was midterm in President Ramos's administration. And like I said, that was part and parcel of it. This is needed infrastructure,
Yes.
but
Yes,
we
yes,
will
yes.
get flack beforehand.
No, it's a tough thing being the leader, right? Well, so you brought up China actually, or I brought up that our GDP is higher. So China and our new leader, our incoming president, seems to take a very different position. I mean, how do you see this playing out on a global stage now?
I don't claim to be an expert on my successor. I do believe he's a patriot. I think he's a no-nonsense guy. Once he gets all of the facts, then I think he will come to the same conclusion.
The same conclusion as you have and maintain policy.
I don't want to say things like, been there and done that. Kind of condescending. But, yeah, again, he will be privy to everything that I'm privy to now.
Okay.
Then, like everybody else, let's see if he comes to a different conclusion.
Let's talk Lenny Robredo then.
Okay.
Lenny Robredo went from the basement, from 1% all the way to winning the vice presidential candidate. She doesn't have a cabinet position right now, but what role do you see her playing coming out?
Well, she has a mandate. No? People
Yes.
look up to her. People are attracted by everything she embodies. No? That if not now, then that leadership position in the future is something that we can all look forward to.
I will ask a controversial question. No, not so controversial. I mean, does she have what it takes to be president?
Same thing I think was talked about during my mom's term when she was running. I don't know how many people still remember the Cory walang alam. To which my mom responded, wala akong alam sa pagpapatay, pagnanakaw, pagsisinungaling. So, when she said, one of the debates made the best woman win. I guess that already shows. But anybody who has ever had the chance to interact with her really gets amazed at how a strong character she is, but not abrasive. How how the sincerity is there. How being grounded really well and down to earth is. And of course, we share the same belief that at the end of the day, it's the people, the people's support or lack of it that makes or breaks us.
Do you think the Filipino public has changed? I mean, in the...
Well, yeah, in a very real sense, no. I keep talking about that. You probably had stories of those number of Filipinos leaving the country. How many stories did we have in a year of that?
Yeah.
And now we have a start. No?
Yes.
The number is anywhere from 400 to 600,000 of the estimated 10 million OFWs have come back to the country. They come back, and we have that lowest unemployment rate. So I assume that they have found meaningful employment here.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was an article in one of the leading broadsheets several weeks ago that says there's a preference for finding work here rather than abroad. That's the reverse. No?
Yes,
So,
yes. I know several people who've come back, for sure.
Yung apathy
Yes.
that people had, indifference to government, let's stop protesting, we can do nothing about it, to now being very, very vocal on various fronts. No? It says that we are complaining because we believe that something can happen. So that whole change, even if with just that, we believe our greatest resource are our people. And if our people are given the right opportunities, they really will excel no matter where they are in the world. No? Now, having said that, everything we've done has been to capacitate everybody to be able to participate in all the opportunities that are happening our way.
I'm going to throw a question from Facebook, and this is about you. Do you have any other political interests or ambitions, such as perhaps the Senate in 2019 or the presidency again? I mean, what's next? I know you're not yet out. 3 weeks in the presidency by tomorrow, but what's next for you?
Siguro, nung lumalaki kami, pag dumating yung Pasko, nakaabot tayo ng susunod na Pasko, laking bagay na doon. Yung in a dictatorship, paano ba nababawi? Di ba? Parang normally bloody revolution, and those yung mga nanguna hindi naaabot sa dulo, hindi na makikita. And we had examples, no? People like Evelio Javier who almost reached it, and countless others. Now, I don't. I was just talking to some friends yesterday. Sabi ko, and I was explaining to them, after my mom stepped down, about a year later, I started working for the family farm in Tarlac, and I had a different lifestyle. Probinsyano na ako doon, which recharged me. If I didn't get that, I probably would not have ventured into politics by 1998. So, at the end of the day, I'm sure, if there is a need that has to be fulfilled, and I think I can fulfill it, I believe I can fulfill it, I will still adopt what my parents said. There's something I could have done, and I chose not to do it. I wouldn't be able to live with myself. But having said that, you'd want, part of the success is to have trained your successors that the things are going well, that there is no need to intervene, and we can have a different lifestyle from our lifestyle. Sa akin, turning point was martial law 72. I was all of 12 years old. I'm 56 now. 44 years I've been somewhat involved in all of the affairs of this country. Today, one of my first thoughts was, she was advising one of her successors, my mom, there is life after the presidency. So in politics, well, this is the penultimate job, going through all of the BS to get here, and all the BS while in here. I don't know, unless there is really that need that I can fulfill, I'd like to look forward to a quiet life.
And now, the last question I'll throw before we end, and I'm sorry for all of the questions that are there on social media. We'll try to get them to you, and I see Sunny Kaloma here, so he will answer some of them also later on. We started with how this presidency changed you, and you talked about this now at the end. The man that you are. When you came in 6 years ago, how would you describe yourself 6 years later? Aside from being more tired, but sorry.
Anyway, when my dad said that the Filipino is worth dying for, then my mom said the Filipino is worth living for. Then I added that Filipino is worth fighting for. You know, I guess it really has to, you know, what? Parang from my dad's solitary cell to EDSA and people trying to stop tanks that are even higher than they are, to all the ingredients necessary for a bloody revolution being present, but we somehow avoided it. Those of a religious bent would like to think God had a part in it. And to now, parang there was a time na sabi ko, ano ba papel mo? Ano pa, di dakilang alalay. There was always some leader that I deferred to suddenly being the leader that everybody deferred to, and everybody was looking for all of the instant solutions yesterday. That the common thread is that, again, it goes back to our people. They weren't there. I won't say I wasn't bothered, I wasn't apprehensive about some of the issues that we had to face going against China. How will China treat us if we dare? But being confident that the people are there, that you present the facts to them, they will see that how reasonable our position, how logical, how correct. We can count on their support. Perhaps sometimes they'll have doubts, but they do come back. Then that really strengthened me to overcome everything that had to be done in our watch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've been speaking with President Benigno Aquino just a day and 3 weeks before the end of his 6 years in office. If you have more questions, put it in. #Rappler Talk. We'll be working to get you some answers. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Maria Ressa.